Good morning. I am Michele Hill from DisruptED TV, and today I am joined by a very prestigious guest, Ted Dintersmith, who I'm thrilled to interview and talk to him about so many things, and I really want to get started right away. So welcome, Ted.
Hey, great to be here.
Oh, awesome. And I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you're in Virginia right now, but you spent a good deal of your adult life in Boston, Massachusetts. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you earned a living for many, many years until what you're doing now. And that's going to segue into the conversation that we're going to have today.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Virginia. Probably some of my views were colored by the fact my dad never graduated from high school. And so for the time I was growing up, he was a carpenter. And my mom was sort of a stay-at-home mom. She did graduate from high school, but college was like this blur out there. You know, nobody in my family had any idea what it was other than thinking that it was the most important thing we could do as kids. And then I kind of wound my way through education, ended up starting early in my career in Boston with a technology startup, and then spent most of my career there in venture capital, backing, entrepreneurs, generally technology-driven entrepreneurs who, set out to bring substantial productivity advances to certain sectors. And that was my life. I mean, I was good at it. I enjoyed it. That was my life for, up until I was maybe 50 years old. And I'd done well in venture. I was, this is the braggy part, but I was ranked tops in the country for the years 1995 to 1999 by one of the trade magazines. And that just gave me a chance to, when my kids were young, to sort of phase out of, that chapter of my life and think about what I do next. And it kind of, did some, fun things for a while, but then eventually kind of got on this whole issue of, a world that's increasingly innovative. How do schools prepare kids for a future we can't even begin to predict? And I really dove into that intensely, almost a decade ago. And that's really defined all of my life and then some, over the past decade. And I often say I work way harder than I did in venture capital. I travel a lot more than I did. And all I do is, I never charge and I give money away, so I'm losing money for doing it. And if you want to say, does this make a shred of sense? I think that's a fair question, but it's such an important fight that's what I feel compelled to do.
Well, and you made such a great point, which is you work harder now doing something that you're not really making tons of money and you give away a lot of money, but it's a passion because you know that it is something that's going to make a difference in the world.
And I would add on the work front, just to be fair and balanced, is when you see how hard our educators, particularly our classroom teachers, work, I am not complaining about my life. I mean, I am just astounded by how dedicated they are and dealing with enormous challenges imposed on them by outsiders who often understand very little about education. And so often, whenever I feel like, man, I should be tired, I just sort of think about the teachers I meet and I say, hey, if they're not tired, I can't afford to be tired. So
thank you for remembering that, because I know that that's a message that has been lost a lot more recently. And the more we can elevate that message, I think the better we are together in education. So this morning, one of the things we talked off camera for a little bit, and you talked about being a venture capitalist, and something that really stood out to me in terms of what you said was really great. Being a venture capitalist, you are taking, I don't want to say blind faith, because certainly there's research and data that you have to do, but there's a level of trust that has to be there for you to invest in a company. And we talked about the model of schools that often that is kind of upside down. So I kind of want to give you that floor for a minute to talk about really building a culture of a school before we get into the innovation of a school, but the culture of a school and why it's so necessary to build it upon trust.
Yeah. And at first, I'm wading into treacherous territory. Anytime you compare business to school, I think most of the time when that happens is business people projecting business principles onto an education system and environment in a way that is misguided. And so knowing that, and I promise I know that. I mean, I really am not just saying those words. I understand, that that, having schools compete against each other and the choice and charter thing, all the deep flaws with that. That's what I write about. That's what I talk about. I will say this though, having competed against large bureaucratic companies, you realize large bureaucracies spend most of their time trying to prevent bad things from happening. And what I loved about the world of innovation, it was all about how do you set up conditions that let great things happen. And, honestly, if we had spent a lot of time with these incredibly talented people that wanted to make the world better, scripting out what they couldn't do, telling them that these are the box they had to check off, or these are the time cards they had to punch, or these are the ways they needed to evaluate their employees, or whatever, a bunch of nonsensical things that define bureaucracies. If that had defined our world, I often say I'd be on the street corner in a cardboard box instead of being able to do some of the stuff I do. So you really do need to bring a high degree of trust to people to pursue what they think is terribly important and do your best to support it. And I find that in our schools, and what I write about, when I get excited about, when I talk about the stuff that's really working, it's when you find and meet and are blown away by classroom teachers, principals, in some cases superintendents, that are on the receiving side of exactly that. Somebody has put in place conditions that empower and enable them to do the work that they believe passionately needs to be done, and extends to them the trust and respect they deserve. And it's like, so that really colors my worldview about what we should be doing. And I think it goes to enormous lengths to explain why federally driven or state-driven policies are often so off in the weeds. These are people that rose to the top of bureaucracies, who get up every morning saying, what policies and procedures and prescriptions do I need to do to make sure bad things don't happen? And I'm not saying I am excited about bad things happening, but I am excited about encouraging kids and their teachers to stretch for the best and not putting them through some, mind-numbingly boring daily regimen that some bureaucratic committee says this will keep some bad thing from happening. And so it's really that mindset. Is it top-down central planning, avoid mistakes, or is it grassroots trusting and empowering, stretching for greatness? And stretching for greatness, not in a standardized, committee agreed upon way, but stretching for greatness that fits with that kid's distinctive interest and talents, as coached and guided and inspired by the surrounding adults, particularly their teachers. Just worlds apart views, right? But if I could only point to an example or two where the empowering people to do great things model worked, I'd say ignore me. But I got an entire book. I've got example after example, something from every place I went where you see that happening. And so the question is, why the heck isn't that the defining organizing principle for education in America, instead of something driven by some generally not terribly informed bureaucracy, whether it's a mega foundation or a secretary of education, or whatever, or business people weighing in on this, but you get all these people that are really at the core non-educators, arrogantly, I think, presuming that they know what's best in our classrooms. And here I am, I am tiptoeing toward the border of hypocrisy, because I am a business guy by background. I am not an educator by background, and I understand that. I'm humble about it. But I really do advocate for extending trust to the people that I have found to be the experts. And those are the educators in the field. Those are the classroom teachers. They are in many cases, the supportive administrators. And they are not the legislators. They are not the Federal Department of Education. They are not, by and large, the state departments of education. They're not the business people who say, I need data, prove to me that these kids are learning by, showing me the test scores. And so, and I do think that's a fair characterization of the fight for the heart and soul of education going forward. I will weigh in. It's not something I write about particularly, but on the issue, I find it so fascinating on the issue of school safety. We live in this country where you get these imbeciles at the highest levels of our government who respond to a school shooting and say, aha, we need to harden those schools and arm our teachers. That's the answer. and instead of saying, let's get a task force of students, teachers, and principals to provide some sort of input on the very issue of, is there anything federal and state governments could do that would actually meaningfully improve the safety of our schools? Because when you talk to them, they say, if these people ever visited a school, they'd realize kids spend a lot of time outside. Do you really think hardening schools is, when even police officers trained to use a firearm often are not helping a situation in a shooting, despite that training, that we want to train people with no experience in fire. It's like these nutty things that come from people that just presume they know better, instead of actually turning to the people that would really understand the problem. And that's on that particular, important, tragic issue of school safety. But it stands for so much more, right? It stands for so much more.
So one of the things we talked about is you talked about something called the Rule of Five. And I'm going to segue this part of our conversation into about what school could be. And you talked about that as well, because you have a movie and you have a book that is called What School Could Be. We talked about the importance and how you agonized over those words of what that meant for you to title the book that, so that it would come across as something that people felt compelled to read, but they also didn't feel like it was a negative connotation on the current state of schools today. It's just imagine what it could be. So let's get right into talking about schools, talk about what school could be, and then tell me about this Rule of Five.
Yeah, so two very big, and related topics. So let me talk about schools. As I traveled, and a lot of the book was based on this somewhat ambitious trip I took during the 2015 and 16 school year. And it was, I'll tell a negative story on myself. You might visualize somebody that's going to travel nonstop for 9.5, 10 months would be a planner. And I am not a planner. And so I had the idea of doing it kind of late July for a trip that started at the beginning of September. So that's like 5 weeks of advanced planning. And only through some fortunate circumstances found a group that actually their specialization is campaign planning for presidential candidates, and was able to convince them to help me. So that really helped with the entire process, because, I was able to travel for 10 months and I could focus on who I was talking to, and somebody else was planning the next week, month, whatever. And we were able to pull together a big cross-section of really great visits and meetings for me. It just gave me an opportunity to see things that on my own I could have never pulled off. So I took that trip, had no intention up front of writing a book about it, was kind of blown away by what I saw, blown away on the positive side by, I mentioned before, the dedication of teachers and their support administrators and support staff, but the people in our schools, how dedicated they are. And I was also blown away by many remarkably innovative learning experiences I came across, where teachers generously shared with me their time and just wanted me to understand what they were doing. And you observe those and you talk to the students, and they're so engaged and they're so precisely knowledgeable about what they're studying. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like if it were only one or two, I wouldn't get really excited, but they're out there. They are out there. And so I wrote the book. And, one of the things to sort of transition to the Rule of Fives that I've been struck by in those travels more broadly is the extent to which education priorities have been driven by, I'd even say co-opted by, a set of views that reflect the perspective that college education is mandatory for every kid. The only way you can be a first-class citizen in America is to be a college-educated, adult. By the essence of the academia that defines colleges, and by sort of a set of overly simplistic measures that we bank on to tell us whether kids are learning, and those measures are sort of grouped into the college ready mantra and mindset. And so you've got this great relationship, right, where at the end of the day, what our kids, 75 million kids in our K through 12 schools do is largely there to meet the needs of college admissions, of ivory tower faculty members, and of the testing and college prep textbook, that whole testing and textbook industry. And then you step back and say, where's this leading us? Like, what are kids really learning from this? And often when I give talks, I'll just go through a list of the types of things kids study in high school today. I don't even have to say high school. When I mention the topics, every audience member instantly associates them with high school. And the reason is because that's the only time you ever do it and it ever mattered, and it goes, you name the topic area, iambic pentameter or stanzas or Ibid and opposite or Crimean War or factoring polynomials or mitosis or balancing a chemical equation or valence electrons. It's a whole bunch of what a friend of mine at Olin College, she calls that just in case learning. Students memorize college ready content just in case they're interested, which they're generally not, just in case they retain it, which they generally don't, and just in case later on in life they actually use it, which they generally don't. And so you start to say, who's falling behind in that and who's getting ahead? And so, if you're a college admissions officer, makes your life easier if every kid's studying the exact same thing and you have test scores that tell how they did on the exact same thing. And I find that those college admissions officers have given very little thought to whether what the kid is studying is actually important at all. And I'll share with you an anecdote on that. So I've given the last 2.5 years, I've given 2 keynotes to 250 college admissions officers. So I stand in front of the room and I say to them, how many of you would value an applicant who chose to take statistics instead of calculus? No hands go up. Calculus is a gold medal in high school math, that's the pinnacle. And if you duck calculus to take something like statistics, you're not at the top of the college application pecking order. So then I asked them, do you know how many adults in America today in their profession do integrals and derivatives by hand? They don't know. I said, let me just make it easy for you. That answer is 0. Not one adult other than a high school calculus teacher today professionally ever does integrals and derivatives by hand. Second related question. Do you know how important a working knowledge of statistics is to citizenship? Really important. Do you know how many career doors are open to somebody who's really facile, really has expertise in statistics? Many. How many important life decisions, health decisions, investment decisions, purchase a home, go on to college and pay all the money in tuition for that? How many life decisions depend on good knowledge of statistics? Many. So can you explain to me why you value a kid who gets good at something no adult uses and penalize a kid that chooses to pursue something indispensable for citizenship, for career, and for personal important decisions? I don't understand that. And they have no answer. I mean, other than, well, calculus is hard, and today most of the better students take it, so we just like them all to take the same meaningless thing, so it's easy for us to compare them. I say to them, that's a pitiful excuse for your priorities.
And I'm hoping that that's an aha moment for them. I'm hoping that they sit back and say to themselves, wow, we probably really should change the way that we accept students. So talk to me about the rule of 5, because that was very, very interesting to me.
Yeah. So the rule of 5s, here's how it goes. Of every 5 kids in America in 8th grade, fast forward. So out of the 5, 1 will not finish high school. So you're a kid in America without a high school degree, you're screwed. 1 will finish high school but do nothing beyond that. You're a kid in America today, particularly if you're one of the 95% plus schools that are entirely college ready, K through 12 tracks, you have learned no distinctive proficiencies through those 12, 13 years in school. You've studied a bunch of iambic pentameter and opposite nibids and things like that. And so you leave high school and the only job you can get is a lousy minimum wage job. And so maybe you get that 30-hour-a-week job without health care, or maybe you don't. But by and large, high school degree only in most of America today, and we can get and should get to where people have the courage to do it differently. But in most of America today, high school only degree, you're in a world of hurt. That's the second out of the five. The third starts down the path of college, generally four-year college, doesn't finish, drops out, generally from a school people haven't heard of, and has, in many cases, a fair amount of student loan debt. You know, you have $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 of student loan debt, you're a dropout of a college, so you're back to the bin of only high school degree. Good luck paying off that amount of student loan debt with a 30-hour-a-week minimum wage job. You're screwed. And it's not that those people don't get that 30-hour-a-week job. I mean, that's the folly of looking at our quote-unquote full employment economy when 95 million Americans have stopped looking for work, and many of them have that crappy 30-hour-a-week job that just barely lets them put groceries on the table. So now we got 3 out of the 5. The fourth and fifth will graduate from college, but the fourth will graduate from college with a degree. They'll get a job at a Starbucks. So they'll get a job that never required a college degree in the first place. And 70% of them also have boatloads of student loan debt. So they look and say, what the hell was that all about? I'm deep in debt and I don't have a job that is in any way, shape, or form what we visualize a college degree guaranteeing. They're screwed. So now we got 1 out of 5 that actually gets the kind of job we think college degrees lead to. But what happens with them? I mean, for some it's great. Many of those are dealing, 70% of those are also dealing with lots of student loan debt, an average of $43,000. So they wake up every day with that hanging over their head. Many get a high-paying job to pay off the student loan debt, but not the kind of job they're passionate about. So they're going through the motions as an accountant or a lawyer. But by the way, lawyer requires 3 more years and another $200,000 to get a job that many, once they start practicing, realize they don't like. And many of these winners are plagued with mental health issues. And you know, because we put them through this competitive meat grinder that's largely said to kids, unless you're perfect, you're not good enough. And so you look at the American Mental Health Association that looks at stats for college kids, and it's like 83% report feeling overwhelmed, 45% report periods of feeling hopeless, 35% report feeling periods of being so depressed they can't get out of bed, a third are on regular diets of Adderall. You know, is that what we're looking for? It's the success case in American education. So out of those 5 that start in high school, best case 1, you know, the 5 we had in 8th grade, best case 1 has come through that rest of that education process intact, doing something they're happy about. And it's not even 1. It's, you know, like 1 out of 10, 1 out of whatever. So it's a tiny sliver. And is that a system that's working? I mean, no. Are colleges going to really bring costs down? No. Are policies that say state colleges should be tuition free going to lead to better education through college? No, it'll lead to worse education. And the poorest of kids that we think that's benefiting still can't afford to pay the fees and the room and board. So it's largely a subsidy to the well-off kids who go to a state college. And so people are running around with these crazy, not well thought out solutions to an epidemic problem. And my book, and I think your work there at Burlington County, I mean, step back and say, what if the goal of K through 12 was not to have a better college application, but to prepare kids for life, to equip kids with at least one distinctive hireable proficiency that they enjoy, to give them a safety net in life, that encourage them to go deep with intellectual passions and interests. And we push on these college admissions officers to start looking at real kids instead of numbers. And to me, that's our best path forward.
Let's talk about that. The title of your book is What School Could Be. What do you envision it could be?
Well, and we'll start with this really interesting issue of my vintage was vocational education, current vintage is career and technical education. And not you, but the prevailing view in our country is that the talented kids take the academic path, and the vocational path is like this life, raft we send out there to try to rescue some kids that couldn't cut it academically. but maybe we can salvage something of a life for them by whatever, getting them good at a profession that many of my, unfortunately, and I hate to say it, many of my friends kind of look down on, which is appalling. And one of the points I go after in my book, and I think it's really a core and important point, is that the academic path is not teaching kids much of anything. And so an example I like to use is, imagine your goal is to have a kid learn about, be curious about, develop some expertise on electricity. Well, today in most of our schools, the way electricity is taught is kids will get a set of equations like Coulomb's law or Kirchhoff's law, and they'll study those, and they'll do homework problems where they're given 3 of the parameters and they have to get the 4th parameter right without a units error or a math error. And then they take a test, generally where they have to have that equation memorized, and they have to do the same thing. They have to solve for that unknown parameter without a math or units mistake. And if a kid can do that and do enough of those in a timed test, they will be viewed as an expert on electricity. They will be the kid that gets a 5 on AP Physics. They will be the kid that gets into a top engineering school. Yet, what in the heck have they actually learned? And one of the videos I use in my talks, and your listeners can just look it up, just Google MIT graduation day light bulb wire battery. And the video was produced by a long-term tenured professor at MIT who's skeptical that MIT students are learning real science and engineering. And that borders on heresy, so I'll say it again. Skeptical that MIT graduates have learned much science or engineering. So to make the point, he interviews a bunch of students in caps and gowns on graduation day at MIT and gives them a light bulb wiring battery and says, "Can you light up the light bulb?" And these students, glorying in the fact that they've just got their college diploma from the most prestigious engineering institute in the world, are almost insulted that they'd be asked if they can do such a low-level task. And then as the 3-minute video, just 3 minutes plays out, you see these students can't do it. And you realize they're graduating because they were very facile at Coulomb's law, but they can't light up a light bulb and a wired battery. And so back to high school, supposing you wanted to get kids excited about and develop an expertise and an understanding of electricity, and did that by shadowing a master electrician and really understanding what life is like to do the wiring of a home electrical system or a building's electrical system, or to troubleshoot and understand how a city's electrical grid works. Supposing it was really hands-on, messy learning, studying in conjunction with a real expert, which is, by the way, master electricians are real experts at that. The point I make, and the reason I think this is important, is that type of learning is actually better preparation for the college path, as well as great preparation for going directly into a trade. The only group it doesn't work for is the college board and college admissions, because it's a lot messier. I mean, how do you explain, the master electrician who has a student shadowing him or her will know when that kid really has begun to understand what loading means, what the risks are in poorly designed electrical systems in a home, how you actually diagnose whether the electrical system is sound or not, what you do when a problem comes up. That master can gauge and assess whether that apprentice or that intern knows what they're talking about. But it's qualitative, it's subjective. Can you put that on an AP exam? No. What you can put on an AP exam is variations of Coulomb's law over and over and over again. And so that's what happens. And so our schools teach what kids are going to be tested on. Our test takers care a lot more about the ease with which they can administer and design the test than whether it leads to any kind of real learning. And so we have this situation in American education where we think the college kid majoring in physics knows more real science than a master electrician. But I actually say it's the opposite, right? And the sooner our country comes to its senses on that and does a lot more what Finland does, where in Finland, half the kids self-select for the trades. And it's not the rich kids that go to college and the poor kids that self-select for the trades. It's equal across income areas. And whether you're rich or poor, it's like being a master electrician is a challenging, demanding, interesting job. that begs for creative problem-solving skills and critical analysis skills and communication skills, entrepreneurial skills, deep technology skills, science insight. Why do we look down on that and glorify a kid who has a diploma from MIT but can't light up a light bulb with a wire and a battery?
Well,
I think it's a fair question. I think it really goes right at the heart and soul of if, in fact, kids in K through 12 were doing real learning instead of committee-driven, easily tested studying. If they were doing real learning, they'd leave high school with multiple life paths, multiple career doors open for them. And we would address a lot of the issues and challenges we have in America today with an increasingly unaffordable and arguably not very useful college education, college diploma that kids need today to get to the starting line of life's economic, I spent, shame on me, but I spent 5 years in graduate school at a place crawling with Nobel Prize winners. And not so much in the theoretical fields of science, but in the experimental fields, in experimental physics, chemistry, biology. I guarantee you that when the Nobel Prize is awarded, it's not going to the person that deserved it. And it's some theory-driven faculty member that will say to the lab techs, wouldn't it be cool if we could design an experiment to catch a gravitron? And the people that are really great with hands-on, the pragmatic, often without a college degree, are the ones that will work endlessly to make that happen. And if they do, who gets a Nobel Prize? It's not lab tech, so-and-so. It is Dr. So-and-so who pioneered this great work to do something that many people at the time they set out on it thought was impossible. But it's really, at the end of the day, in those labs, in our colleges, a lot of the really great work is being done by the techs and not by the faculty. They understand the faculty has no idea what they're doing or how it's going to work or any of that. And so why? I mean, I'm not dissing on the professor, but I'm saying it can't be the case that person is glorified, that person is put on this pedestal, and the people that really made it happen, the people with deep understanding of what's required in the field in a practical way to understand and capture certain phenomena, that really do understand science at a very basic level, important level, are the ones that are sort of lost in the shuffle. But back to the K through 12 path, if kids were understanding these, if kids were understanding chemistry and anatomy and math and economics in the context of culinary, not every kid, but if that were an option in a path, I think you'd find way more kids excited about those core disciplines, actually mastering the aspect of the discipline that's relevant to culinary, but they leave high school, particularly if you can equip them with some entrepreneurial skills so they knew how to market themselves as a catering service or whatever. They leave high school not predetermined to be a chef, but with that possibility, with that safety net.
With the skill set.
Yeah, no matter what I do in my life, I can always support myself doing something I enjoy because I'm really good at culinary. And if we don't check off every box of the chemistry, anatomy, math, and economics checklist, until somebody gives me evidence that this broad, sweeping, cover every speck of content actually leads to real learning, which so far nobody's been able to give me evidence that it leads to real learning. Until that is demonstrated, I say, why not master a few things really well that are aligned with a career path instead of superficially glossing over a whole laundry list of things and not retaining any of them? So I want to, on project-based, a lot of people will see, my film Most Likely to Succeed or read my books and say, incorrectly, but they will assume that I think that the magic bullet in education today is project-based learning. And the only way kids can learn is through project-based learning, and anything else isn't effective, which is absolutely not what I think. And so I think it's an important point to make. Project-based learning, personalized learning, all these phrases, all these kind of buzzwords in education, you have to really drill down and see what's actually going on with it. And so, because I've seen great examples of project-driven learning, and I've seen pretty dismal examples. And so you'll see some where they'll say, well, in 8th grade, in the Common Core, kids need to understand iambic pentameter, factoring polynomials, and valence electrons, and somebody will dream up some cockamamie project that covers those three things that anybody will look at and say, this is just weird. This makes no sense to me. And I don't think that gets kids excited, and I don't think it leads to really great career paths and life paths. And so, I think we err when we just take a phrase and say, aha, that sounds better, because sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. But back to culinary. Supposing you had a semester-long course where you challenge kids who found it interesting to create and perfect a dessert that they thought would just blow away a master chef. And supposing that the real evidence of learning and accomplishment was by asking local chefs to come in one day to the school and sample what the kids produced, and encourage those chefs to be open-minded about if some of these students have done things that are blown away, would you give them a summer internship, a paid internship, where part of their responsibilities would include creating and putting that dessert on the menu, but part of it would be just learning the ins and outs of culinary, of operating and managing a great restaurant from this master chef. Just to finish the culinary point, imagine if you had kids for a semester in school interested in culinary and challenge them with the goal of creating and perfecting a dessert that would blow away master chefs, culminating in an end of semester review where you invite master chefs in the community to come in to the school and evaluate and give feedback to the students for the desserts they created, and encourage those master chefs to be open-minded about if some of these students did something that they were blown away by, consider them for a summer internship where you might put that dessert on the menu for the summer. The student would have part of their responsibilities be to actually prepare that dessert, but the student would have a chance to really learn from a master chef. I guarantee you the master chefs will be flattered beyond belief, and many would say, I'll be there. The students will be so motivated because the authentic nature of that assessment, it is real, right? Master chefs taste your dessert and tell you what they thought of it. And many of those kids would be not just equipped with a path forward that would give them a fulfilling, interesting career in culinary, but I actually would argue those kids are going to be learning more important chemistry in the course of that than the kids taking AP chemistry. And so those kids would actually have better preparation to be chemistry majors or chemical engineers in college than the kids taking AP chemistry.
So I'm going to pose one last question to you, which is many educators would probably say, yes, we agree that career-based education or life skill-based education should be the standard norm, but what about the value of being a well-rounded, college-educated person? Are we preparing kids for a job, or are we preparing them for life? And so how would you answer that question to someone who poses that to you?
Yeah, and I think it's an important, relevant, and fair question. And in my book, there is a fair amount about paths that help kids develop a distinctive proficiency that gives them a career path. The point I make is that's not 100% of their time for 6 years. That is the equivalent of a course or two for 2 years plus some summer experience. It's not their education, it's part of their education. And when I look at what instead they're doing, and you start to put that long list of topics, and then you ask adults, how many of these do you actually use as an adult? And the answer is precious few. And when you ask kids 3 months later how much they retain of it, and the answer is precious little, I don't see an enormous downside of redirecting some of the focus in school away from abstract, symbolic, college-ready content toward something like a distinctive career proficiency, particularly when done right, that leads to deep insights into the academic discipline that underlies it. So it's not the only priority in school, but should it be a priority? I think it absolutely should be. And when you look at the number of kids coming out of college, so we're not just talking about K through 12, but K through 12 plus another 4 years that is typically $60,000 to $300,000 of more formal costly instruction. They get done with that path and have nothing of interest for any employer, something's really wrong. But I think it's imperative here that I emphasize, it's not that we make school entirely about career. It's that we start stepping back and saying how much of what they're doing today is essentially a dead weight loss that's only there because people haven't had the wherewithal or the vision and courage to say, is this requirement still needed? Is this still an important thing to learn? Are we just doing this because we've always done it? Or is this really going to, in a way we can explain clearly, really going to give a kid great life prospects? And if you think almost everything they're doing in school today is aligned with great life prospects for kids, then stop listening to me. But I think if you really go back, just Google, pull up grade 7 through 12 curriculum, look at that checklist of things that kids are taking, start looking at all the results when people ask adults things like, should we be appalled? Should we be alarmed that I think it's 1 out of 20 adults in America today can provide any kind of a working explanation of the US Constitution? 1 in 20. What could be more important to our democracy today, particularly today, than understanding the Constitution, what its role is, what it says, what it doesn't say, what it means to amend it? Is it a living document or is it locked in time? These are really vital issues to our democracy. But 1 in 20 adults, 20 and 20 covered it somewhere in school. They all covered it. Everybody covered it. But it's friggin' 20 minutes of AP US history. I mean, how good do we feel because we can check it off and say in AP US history, every kid studied the Constitution, paren, for 20 friggin' minutes, close paren, and only 1 in 20 adults can actually explain what it does. And so I say, when you superficially gloss through mountains of content the kids have no voice in, generally no interest in, that generally we can't give them the answer when they say, when will I ever use it? We need to step back and start picking our spots. I think everybody would agree. Expertise, mastery, understanding the US Constitution is something we owe every kid coming through our education system. If we believe that, let's do it. Let's stop idealizing what's accomplished in some bullshit thing like AP US history that goes from 1491 to the present day. Yet most people will say, the best history experience for a kid in our high schools, they've really shown they've learned a lot, is when they get a 4 or 5 in AP US history. That's just not true. And so should the entire focus of school be career? Absolutely not. Could we open up things to kids that they find really engaging, that lead to a deep mastery of important areas of expertise, that as part of the consequence of that learning experience, give them an important career path forward, but also make adjacent areas that much more interesting? Not only can we do it, we're doing it. Your school is doing it. Schools are doing it. We don't have to go to Finland or depend on an R&D initiative to figure out how to do it. It is happening. The problem is just happening for a sliver of our kids. And if only a sliver of our kids are getting real life options out of school, we're in a world of hurt going forward.
Maybe we need to rethink whether every student needs to go to college or not, or if that's the path for success in this country.
Bingo.
So, well, I thank you so much, because this has been a wonderful, just eye-opening, conversation that we've had today. And I also want to make sure that everyone understands that you have a terrific movie and a terrific book that I just ordered my copy that I'm going to read about what school could be. And that it's just really amazing. So now how can they access the video?
So all the stuff I work on is on my personal website, which has the very creative name, www.teddintersmith.com.
Okay.
The film, if you just Google most likely to succeed documentary, that'll get you to where you need to go on the film. But that's also on my website under films, or that URL directly is www.mlts, as the most likely to succeed, mltsfilm.org. And it's on iTunes and Google Play and, Amazon Prime, it's on all those things. And then the book, you can just go to your bookstore. I hope they have it. Although I went to the local bookstore here in Charlottesville last week, and I tweeted about this, but there was a massive multi-shelf area of test prep books. And to find thoughtful books on education, you had to ask And you had to go through a bunch of C-spot run books, children's books, to find this little thing in the very back, tucked away with a handful of books that had brought any degree of thoughtfulness to what we should be doing in education, which is, I think, an unfortunate reflection on what we value about school today. But anyway, what school could be, that's just www.whatschoolcouldbe.org, or my website. And then encourage people, we've been working on this resource that addresses what I think is the most important priority in education in US today, which is how can you help an existing school change? And we have a set of really thoughtful resources, teacher-led, small steps that lead to big change, agile, easily digestible support resources. And that is, we call it the Innovation Playlist, but that's www.innovationplaylist.org. And then, if you want to deal with, I am on Twitter. My firm actually was first round investor. I apologize for that. I have a feeling all of our lives would be better off if all this social media disappeared, but I am on Twitter, and that's just at Dintersmith. And I address a bunch of education, but also democracy issues on that. So if you're interested in following,
social media when it's used correctly really brings people together, which is what brought us together today. So I'm thankful for that. This is just a timely conversation that is so important to have when people are listening intently right now to different people who have different thought processes about what school could be, because we are ready to disrupt this model that we have, this traditional model of education. And that's what DisruptED TV is doing. It's giving a platform to people who want to change how things have been done in the past, and keep what worked and what's really good, but build upon it and change it so that all students have the opportunity to reach their highest potential and have success.
Awesome. Well, keep it up. You're doing great work there, so it's inspiring.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And I know that everyone can find you on your web address, and you mentioned that. And your Twitter handle is?
At Dintersmith. Very creative, right?
Okay, good. Awesome. So I look forward to being connected with you, and I so appreciate this opportunity. And I hope you guys will join me on Teacher Sparks again.
Excellent. Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.